Hello, I'm Ed Rabyd, otherwise known as the Rabyd Atheist, a former pastor turned atheist, now a compassionate anti-theist. Welcome to my channel. You're free to like or dislike the video, so feel free to hit those buttons. Feel free to comment below, and I'd appreciate it if you would subscribe to the channel and hit your notification bell for more content as it is released. You're also free to share my videos as much as you like. Just kind of a little bit of a report. I will be doing my Friday video. As you could tell, last video I was using a different camera on a different laptop that I have now, and I watched the video just looking at video content, video quality, and I like it a lot better. The lens on this thing is a little bit more wide angle, so you see a little bit more of the background than you used to. You also can see some of what's on my shirts now. I have a tendency to wear t-shirts that are weird in some respects, or at least have some message that's significant to me. Today I'm wearing my Ferris State shirt. I am an alumnus. So, but we're going to continue here on the Ten Commandments sucking. And this is part 8, and I want to do a few concluding notes on Exodus 34 as I branch into Deuteronomy 5, which is the third major set of the Ten Commandments. The first thing we need to remember is that there is a major discrepancy between what is found in Exodus 20 and Exodus 34. And Exodus 34 is actually what the Bible calls the Ten Commandments, which has nothing to do with morality and has a whole lot to do with God's covenant with Israel and all the ritualistic, religious type commandments that they need to do in order to maintain that relationship with God, to maintain their covenant with God, so to speak. Exodus 20, by contrast, is a very moral set. At least it tries to present a morality and an ethic of how to live life. And it's interesting that this is why this is, when people talk about the North American Judeo-Christian ethic from the United States, this is what they're talking about. They're talking about this idea that the Ten Commandments becomes the basis for everything we do in the United States. Although having read the Constitution and read a lot of the Founding Fathers myself in the context of my political science degree, I would say that the Founding Fathers were very much for a secular government that had nothing to do with religion, or didn't want religion in it at all, for the purpose of making everything fair for all religions. Plus, they had seen the danger of having religious theocracies and religious monarchies and religious oligarchies. The moment you add the word religious to any governmental form is usually when it goes south and it becomes very oppressive, and they wanted to avoid that. But here we get to Deuteronomy chapter 5, and we have a restatement of the law. In fact, Deuteronomy means second law. And the idea of the second law is that now that the people, according to the narrative, the people have been wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. The generation that refused to enter the promised land and didn't believe suddenly finds themselves dead, pretty much, and everybody 40 and under grows up another 40 years. I'm certain there's more babies born and things like that, and the older people all die off, and only Joshua and Caleb, and at this time Moses, are left. And Moses basically gets up and he wants to restate the law and the covenant to another generation. That's at least what the narrative says. Now, as I've mentioned before, there's really no historical evidence that a person named Moses even existed. A lot of people say, well, the absence of evidence isn't evidence against. Except it kind of is, when you consider that in the place of where there should be some evidence, there's a lot of other evidence that contradicts the Bible quite deeply. Most notably, how in the world do you have a conquest of Canaan during a time when the Egyptians had basically controlled Canaan for the entire period from the Exodus to Joshua to the early part of Judges? When those events are supposed to be taking place, Egypt controls the Levant. They control Palestine very, very decisively. They have colonies up there, and they have strong rulers from the Pharaoh, and it's not that far to move. literally, army of Pharaoh could move from the northern part of Israel back to his capital in Egypt in 9-10 days. So it's not that difficult. I mean, you can walk that distance probably in 7 to 9 days. And the real problem then with this whole second law from a historical point of view is it probably actually then represents another tradition that the writers of the Pentateuch, or the editors, probably would be a better way to put it, of the Pentateuch, are trying to put this all together, and they're trying to make it into one book. And they run into this account, the second law of Deuteronomy, and it has all these different laws. I really think what happened with the Pentateuch at this point, and I think the Ten Commandments illustrate this very well, because the Deuteronomy account is different than the Exodus 20 account, although very similar. But also you have the other issue with this one, which is that you have this different groups of people with different Ten Commandment traditions trying to conglomerate them together. And I think the whole narrative is really a mythology of the Israelites. And then they take all these laws and all these stories and all these other things from around them, and they kind of glom it all together. I think this is why you have two very different Ten Commandments between Exodus 20 and Exodus 34, because you have a couple different traditions here. There is some evidence that a kingdom of Judah and a kingdom of Israel existed. So those two traditions begin to combine themselves into one tradition to call themselves Israelites or the Jews. And you end up with this kind of conglomeration of laws. Well, you need a narrative to put all that conglomeration together. And then you get to Deuteronomy 5. And Deuteronomy 5 is a completely different tradition. It's a different textual tradition. I mean, when we go back to my thoughts on the JEPD theory, the Deuteronomy theory, that part of that theory is the whole book of Deuteronomy, because it kind of stands alone. And it really, so we have this different tradition. So how do we write it into the narrative? Well, we write it into the narrative by saying, well, this is a new generation that's about to enter into the promised land. They're actually going to enter into the promised land, and the law is restated for them. And so you have this different tradition. With the first Ten Commandments, you have Mount Sinai and going up, and then, the law is given there. Here, you might have had a tradition that had people making a covenant with God. You have the mountain of blessing and the mountain of cursing, and suddenly you have a problem. How do I knit these two traditions together? Well, you just kind of make a narrative where this is the second law. This is where the law is given a second time. And it really doesn't represent a second or a part of this narrative, because I think a lot of the narrative of the Pentateuch is made up, or at least borrowed, and with the names changed to protect the innocent or guilty, depending on how you look at it. And you end up with this mythology. And then the real heart and soul of the mythology is the law. Well, how do we make this unified? Well, we unified under a character by the name of Moses, and we put it all together. I bring all that up because I think the Ten Commandments really speak to this, because in the three major Ten Commandments, you have a tradition of a moral law. In the Deuteronomy, you also have a moral law, but in Exodus 34, you have a completely different law, and it's not supposed to be different because that text clearly states that it's supposed to be word for word what the original Ten Commandments was. And that's the only place, Exodus 34, that's called the Ten Commandments. We're not even going to get that here in Deuteronomy chapter 5. What we're going to get is a lot of similarities between this and Exodus 20. And so you end up with kind of a reaffirmation of those commandments. But there's some interesting, weird differences that I find interesting. And so it becomes a little bit different, and there's a different way. I mean, most of the morality questions that I had with Exodus 20 are still going to be here. I may restate them briefly, much briefer than I did before, and then move on. But I want everybody to understand a little bit of the background here, because we're dealing with a textual tradition that is very different than the rest of the Pentateuch. And because it's very different, it's very doubtful that this was written by Moses either. In fact, this is one of those books that really reads like somebody sitting there recording the events, except there's certain hints in it that say that it's probably not an eyewitness account. And then, of course, Deuteronomy ends with the death of Moses, which obviously Moses didn't record himself. So whether or not this was a book of Moses, I think is finally fairly doubtful for a lot of reasons. But, here we have this case. So let's get into it, and we'll see what some of those differences are and what those similarities are. So here we go. Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 1. Then Moses summoned all Israel and said to them, Hear, O Israel, the statutes and ordinance which I am speaking to you today in your hearing, that you may learn them and observe them carefully. The Lord our God made a covenant with us at Horeb. The Lord did not make this covenant with our fathers, but with us, with all of us alive here today. The Lord spoke to you face to face at the mountain from the midst of the fire, while I was standing between the Lord and you at the time, to declare to you the word of the Lord, for you were afraid because of the fire and did not go up into the mountain. And he said, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. Very similar to the original law. I don't really have any other beefs with it other than the same commandment seems to indicate that, we're changing one form of slavery to another form of servitude, where you're basically giving up all of your rights to guide yourself to an invisible sky daddy. And that's because we said so. He even mentions the fact that it was Moses himself, even here, I went up to the mountain. I was the one that heard everything. All you people did is hear thunders and lightnings and whatever, because you were afraid of the fire. And so you kind of hear an admission by Moses, the character of Moses, that I'm the only one that really heard these things, but you can bear witness that I heard them, even though you didn't hear them. So you have that. And he uses this as, I brought you out of the house of slavery, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. Once again, I have to reiterate, this would have been a great place to say, because you were under the yoke and under the bondage of slavery, no other being shall own another being. No person shall own another person. Everybody shall stand, whether male or female. You are all free, because I freed you from Egypt, and that's the way you should conduct yourself. You should conduct yourself in a way that is indicative of that freeing, and you won't have slaves in your country, either your own countrymen or the people around you. It would have made a great statement. It would have certainly made Israel a very different place, and it would have gone a long way, I think, to kind of softening this idea that God is a good guy and the Bible is inspired. I think we would still have some contentions about both of those, but at least we would have a clear definition that slavery is wrong, and this would have been a great place to do it. I'd also like to point out that verse 7 doesn't really get rid of the idea that other gods actually exist. It just says that the big chief God, the God that's supposed to be the big one in the people of God's life, is Yahweh, and that they're not to have any others. This isn't an admission that those gods don't exist. You don't really get that observation until the prophets. It's more of, these other gods exist, but you're going to worship me instead, because I'm the most powerful one. You shall not make for yourself an idol or any likeness of what is in heaven or above or on earth beneath or the water under the earth. You shall not worship them or serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity on the fathers and on the children, and on the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing loving kindness to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments. There's a lot to unpack here. As I said before, I think you have a problem with art and creativity if you follow this commandment. It doesn't leave a lot of room for human expression in the form of art, either sculpture, painting, drawing. Probably even within this framework, you're looking at a restriction on stories, a restriction on, music even, because you have to not really be singing the praises of anything but God. It's like a ruler telling the bards of the land that you're only allowed to sing about me, and you're only allowed to sing about me positively. You're not allowed to do any dissent. You're not allowed to do anything different. And I think that's kind of where this thing goes, and it really starts there and goes downhill from there. I'm a jealous God. Later on, the God of the Bible condemns jealousy as a sin, but he's allowed to be jealous. So is jealousy always a sin? It becomes a real problem. And can God sin if he can be jealous? It just creates a lot of problem. And then once again, we have this idea of punishing the innocent descendants of somebody for some crime that they did. I don't really find this very moral or very upright. It's still a big problem to me that you would punish innocent because of what the guilty did. And then you have this, I show my loving kindness to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. You have that dichotomy of fear of being punished and reward for obedience. And that is very much an abusive tactic, if you ask me. Keeping people, I'm a loving, kind God, but, don't flirt. It's like really, this passage does read like a jealous spouse telling their spouse, don't flirt with the other people. Don't talk to them. Don't do anything. Don't have any relationship with any other person that might be that I would consider wrong, or I'm going to punish you and your children and your children's children and your children's children's children. And yeah, I'm going to visit the iniquity on your head if you do that. But, I'm merciful. If you obey me and you love me, boy, I want to talk about a sadomasochistic relationship again. Abject obedience in the context of absolute love, in the context of absolute fear. What could go wrong? What could go wrong with something like that in a relationship like that? I don't know. It might be pretty damn abusive if you ask me. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not leave him unpunished who takes his name in vain. Same problem. What do we mean here? What does it mean to take the Lord's name in vain? It's never explained. It's never reiterated. Here we have the second law, where somebody probably did ask that question by now, but the law never addresses it. Doesn't matter. I mean, we're going to basically leave that open to interpretation of the religious ruling class, and they can make that mean anything they want. Blasphemy becomes very much a real thing. People can be killed for it. We don't like blasphemers. We don't like people challenging our rule. We don't like people challenging this. So yeah, we're gonna use this commandment to get rid of people. Once again, really shows an insecure God that can't take a little criticism, can't take a joke, can't take art about something besides himself, can't take any language about anything but praise to him. This is a pretty narcissistic God, if you ask me. He's, if you're asking people to worship you all the time simply because, that's pretty narcissist. That's pretty, it's pretty much hey, you guys aren't allowed to do anything. You're not allowed to talk anything. You're not allowed to do anything without my permission. You're not allowed to do anything that gratifies yourself, because unless you're about gratifying me and worshiping me and bowing down and fawning before me, you're not in the right frame of mind. And I'm going to make commandments against it. And it culminates with the next one I'll get to, and then I'll call it for this one, because I find this last one interesting. Observe the Sabbath day to keep it holy, as the Lord your God commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work. You and your son and your daughter, male servant or your female servant, or your ox or your donkey, or any of your cattle, or your sojourner who stays with you, so that your male servant and your female servant may rest as well as you. You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you mighty hand and outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord your God commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. Now there's a ton of differences here, and this is what I'm going to wrap up with, and we'll probably pick it up here next time. But look at this, okay? Somebody must have obviously made the connection between the slavery in the house of Egypt and the fact that Israel still had slaves, and might have said, hey, why is this justified? And what you get here also is another difference that I have to point out before I get into that one. The original Sabbath command in Exodus 20 isn't justified by slavery in Egypt. In fact, you see that at the beginning of both of these, where slavery, I brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage, you won't have any other gods before me. But that's the same justification. The justification for the Sabbath before is that God rested on the seventh day and did his work on 6 days. So therefore, everybody, his servant, should emulate him. Not here. Here it's, you shall remember you were a slave in Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. Now the rest is about how God delivered them. And yet, and there's even a remark about how your male and female servant will rest on the Sabbath day as much as you. So we have this issue now of a justification being used for two different commands, indicating maybe an editing issue, because we had all these traditions again floating around. And so, there was a disagreement. Well, is the Sabbath justified by this six days work, 1 day off, or is it, or like God, or is it justified by the fact that, we were slaves in Egypt and God has brought us out with a mighty hand? Once again, what a great spot this would have been to say, okay, you shall remember that your male servant and female will rest as well as you. You're going to give them a day off from work. Remember also that because you were slaves, you're not supposed to own your servants as slaves. You're going to pay them a decent wage, and you're going to take care of them. Doesn't say that. It just straight up says, you're going to let you rest. Remember you were a slave in Egypt, and so on and so forth. What we have here, once again, with these first four commandments, is God basically saying, don't screw with me. Don't make fun of me. Don't make images that aren't with me. Make sure you take a day off like I did. Remember me, worship me, worship me, worship me, worship me. This is what I would consider to be somewhat of a narcissist at this point, and God definitely fits the qualities of a narcissist. He's definitely about himself. He's definitely about people worshiping him and doing things, as we learned in Exodus 34, exactly the way he wants them done. Make sure you're following the plan that I gave you, not somebody else's. So this is kind of where we end up here with this discussion of God. While this commandments list so far is very similar to Exodus 20, there are some differences, but the similarities still, rather than helping the problem, seem to compound it in the sense that it makes it even worse. So we have, at this point in this last set of the Ten Commandments, the third one, basically a restatement of the first with some interesting differences, but still having not much effect on the people, as we will see, as you see in the history of Israel, as written in the Bible. Idolatry, not keeping the Sabbath, doing all the things that you're not supposed to do here as far as worship of God, is very much practiced by the Israelites. In fact, according to the narrative, it's why they get into trouble all the time. But that's enough for today. I'm glad you stuck around a little bit longer for this part 8 of the 10 Commandments Suck. I will, of course, link the original series at the beginning of this set of videos, at the beginning of this video, rather, so that you can watch the whole series if that is your desire. Comments have a way of influencing the content of Friday's video. That's particularly true of the last couple weeks, and will probably be true of next week. I will respond to them when I can. I respond to comments when I can, but I'm a busy person. You can also ask a direct question to me anytime if you're looking to understand something. You can always suggest what you would like me to do as far as content as well. If it involves theology, Bible, political science, not politics, political science, I have no problem with it. Mondays are uploaded Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, whenever possible. And, just a reminder to subscribe. like and get your notifications. And when you're down there doing your comments, be kind to one another, and don't name call. Demonstrate your point. Don't just name call. And hopefully I someday can convince you to be a rabid atheist like myself. This is Ed Rabyd, also known as the Rabid Atheist, signing off. Thank you for stopping by my channel. I wish you a good day, and goodbye.